All right, so this offseason has been pretty interesting. There have been a number of teams who have been pretty busy between the NBA draft, making trades, or NBA free agency. But regardless of that, there are still a number of players that are kind of stuck on their current teams in situations that just don't make a ton of sense for them. So right now, for example, there are some guys that are stuck on a rebuilding situation and their vets are putting up great numbers and they'd be better off playing for a contender, or there are guys who are stuck on a contending team where they're just not a great fit. So Bleacher Report just put out an article listing off a number of guys who are in those types of situations, and I'm going to react to those names and see if they make sense for these guys to end up being traded into different situations, either this offseason or directly before the trade deadline of this coming 2024-25 season. So the first guy they list off is Jerami Grant from the Portland Trailblazers. I have been an advocate for Jerami Grant for a long time. He is a very underrated player, very large skill set as a wing guy who can create, can knock down shots, is a very versatile defender. He's put up great numbers on a bad team for the last couple of seasons, but he also has experience playing in a winning situation, being a role player in a winning situation. He was great in 2020 as a starter for the Nuggets, who made the West Finals in 2020. This move has to happen at some point, and I think this is kind of the time to do it. As I said, he's been putting up great numbers on a bad team for a while. There are no questions about if he can contribute to winning, and it's just time for Portland to let him go. He is one of those vets who's putting up good numbers on a bad team, and they need to continue to make room for other guys during this rebuilding process. They're trying to develop Scoot Henderson. They're trying to develop Shaedon Sharpe. You have to make room for those guys to fully develop. And Jerami Grant is primarily an offensive-minded player, a score-first player. Moving him away gives space to those two young guys in order for them to develop into the scorers, into the offensive forces that Portland is projecting them to be. And I kind of feel bad for Grant because he came here expecting to play for somewhat of like a playoff contender. He signed a big 5-year, $60 million contract with Portland. And the day after that, Damian Lillard requested a trade. We saw that happen a lot. It happened like with the Rockets a few years ago, where a ton of guys joined that roster expecting to win with James Harden, and Harden wants out. And there's a whole debacle there and things like that. So that's kind of what Jerami Grant experienced here with Portland. Like I said, he came here expecting to win at some level and just kind of got stuck in a really weird rebuilding situation that Portland didn't really see coming. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't, but just an ugly situation where you come here with your expectations and now you're stuck in a rebuild. So it makes sense to put him on a contender. He could be great in a role player type of situation for a really, really good team. As I said, he can be a creator, but can also play well off the ball with his ability to knock down shots off the catch. He made 40% of his threes in back-to-back seasons. And in 2020, where he was playing off the ball a ton, he knocked down 39% of his three-pointers while Denver made the Western Conference Finals. And he can also attack closeouts, which can open up a ton of offense. He's a great slasher, not super quick right now, but creative enough to open up a ton of opportunities. So he's not just kind of sitting out there on the perimeter waiting to get a three-point shot, and if somebody closes out on him, that's over with. He can do a lot out of that, and the ability to attack closeouts can open up a ton of your offense. I talked about that with the Mavericks. They got Najee Marshall. He's really good at attacking closeouts, and it's going to open up a ton of opportunities for that Dallas scoring attack. So yes, I'm a huge advocate of moving Jerami Grant to a winning situation. So let's make that happen as soon as possible, Portland, to also make some room for your younger guys like Scoot and Shaedon Sharpe. Next player they list off here is Zach Lavine. This is probably the most obvious name on the list. The Bulls have been very disappointing the last few seasons, and it really isn't their fault. They built something that looked great initially between Lonzo Ball, DeMar DeRozan, and Lavine, but injuries made everything fall apart, and they never recovered. I remember how excited I was about that trio when they first got put together, and they played great, but the injuries were just really tough for them to avoid, right? And like I said, it's kind of why Zach Lavine's value is a bit in question because of his injury history. So they need to commit fully to a rebuild. DeRozan's out, and they've drafted some other pretty good young players that have been impressive on the summer league circuit. It's time for them to commit fully to a rebuild. That means Zach Lavine's got to go to a different situation to clear room for those other younger guys. They need to focus on having a couple of tanking seasons so they can get as high up in future drafts as possible. Lavine is one of those good vet guys like Jerami Grant in a situation that needs rebuilding. It's time for a move to happen at this point. Issue is Lavine's value is in question for a number of reasons. For one, like I said, he is an injury-ridden player. He's also not a great defensive player on the perimeter, which is very valuable to a contender, and also has limited playoff experience despite being 29 years old. So in one series in his career, it was a 5-game gentleman sweep against the Bucks where he averaged only 19 points on 42% shooting. I believe that was in the 2022 postseason. So his value is a bit in question at this point, and that's apparent because the Bulls have been trying to make a move with him for a while and teams aren't really buying into it. Now, I do think it's a little ridiculous that no contender would want to get him because of his wide offensive skill set. Somebody could use him, but I can see why there are concerns, like I said, with the injuries and defense and things like that. But there's a team out there who can use Zach LaVine's services for sure. He is still a great offensive force when he's healthy. You can talk about defense as much as you want to, and I understand the concerns with that. But he's too talented of a player for no contender to want him, kind of like what we're seeing now. So hopefully the Bulls find a situation for him because I'd like to see him win and play for a contender because I've watched him be really good offensively for a while. And for the Bulls, like I said, they just need to go into a rebuilding situation because things post Derrick Rose have been really inconsistent and weird. They haven't had anything that's been sustainable for, a long period of time, right? They haven't had something that's made sense for a minute. So it's time for something new to happen. And I think moving Zach LaVine is the way to make that happen and the way to open up this newer opportunity and things like that, because they just haven't fully committed to a rebuild for a while. Now is the perfect time. Next guy on the list is another very obvious one, and that is D'Angelo Russell. So with him, he just doesn't give the Lakers what they need. So he is still a great offensive player when he has it going. We've seen that a ton through the regular season. In a couple of seasons with the Lakers, in like his second stint here, he has been pretty good offensively as like a third option, maybe like fourth option scorer, still really efficient. Last season, he put up 18 points and 6 assists per night on great splits. But once again, his play dwindled in the postseason, and he still struggles to be a good enough defensive player. Those were the concerns we had for him coming into last season, and those continue to be the concerns we have for him right now. And also, there is an issue with the Lakers backcourt. So right now, that backcourt is Austin Reeves and D'Angelo Russell. Those are their two starting guards. Offensively, they're fine. Two really good shot creators. Those guys can play well on the offensive end, but none of them are prolific defensive guards. That is a huge issue when it comes to the postseason. You cannot have a backcourt that is that weak defensively. And I know Lakers fans are going to get on me and say Austin Reeves did get better as a point of attack defender later in the year, but still, generally, this is not a very reliable defensive backcourt. There's a bit of a redundancy where you have two great shot creators in your backcourt, but none of them are good enough to execute from a defensive standpoint when there are so many great perimeter options in the Western Conference. Two scoring-minded point guards who cannot defend well is not going to go very far for you in the postseason in the West. So they're better off going into another direction, and I think need to look into making a move ASAP. This is just not a backcourt to win a title with, especially on top of that, I mentioned the defense, but there's just a lack of trust right now from Lakers fans with D'Lo's recent playoff issues. He hasn't really given us much to believe in right now when it comes to his postseason play, not just with the Lakers, but really over the course of his career. He hasn't gotten deep into the playoffs a ton. He made one West Finals appearance, and he was questionable in that series, just did not play well offensively. So there's a lot of concern about the defense and just D'Lo's play. Is he that reliable of an option out there on the perimeter? Final name here is Anfernee Simons. So I already talked about it earlier with Jerami Grant. The Portland Trailblazers are a team that needs to shed some of their vets to make room for their rebuild. Simons isn't a vet, but he's 25. He's put up some great numbers, is an amazing offensive force. It's time for him to go to a contender, but more so for Portland, it's time for them, as I said, to shed some of their guys to make room for Shaedon Sharpe and Anfernee Simons, right? If you're going to try to develop two perimeter scoring players like Sharpe and Scoot Henderson, if you're going to try to develop those guys, it makes sense to get rid of guys like Grant and Simons to make room for them, right? So that should definitely happen with Simons right now. Your question is, what is his role on a contender? Can he be like a second option scorer on a contender? Probably not, but I still think he could play a big role in the offense of a contending team and provide a ton of value. Not a great playmaker, still is a relatively high turnover guy, not an amazing defender, but a great offensive option. Some team out there who's looking to contend and get to the next level can use another high-level shot creator like Simons. Simons is a high-level shot creator. He's done it at a high volume. he can provide a ton of benefit to a team looking for a slight boost on the offensive end. So hopefully these guys end up in a newer situation this coming season so it can make sense. Things can make sense for their current teams and also for them, especially as they're looking to kind of enter new points in their career. For Simons, looking to just be on a playoff contender. Same for Zach Lavine. For D'Lo, just figuring out what that right situation and role is for himself. For Grant as well, trying to get on a good team to properly utilize his skill set and things like that. So hopefully one of these moves, at least one of these moves, can end up happening. But these are guys who should end up in different situations this coming season. And we'll see what their teams end up doing ahead of the trade deadline.